In one of the retreats that I conducted during the closing session, one of the participants shared in the plenary portion of the retreat, and she said, "I really would like to thank Brother Bobby because every time I look at him, I see Jesus." When I heard those words, I was so embarrassed that I was tempted to hide behind the chair. You see, I know myself. I know my weaknesses, I know my sins, I know my shortcomings, and I know that I'm so far from the kind of man that Jesus was. The way I live my life is so far from the way he lived his life. But then looking back in retrospect to that moment, I also realized that that's what God desires from all of us, to become more and more like Jesus. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about how do I become like Christ. In the Old Testament, in Genesis, when God created man, He created us in His own image and in His own likeness. And it says, "So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God He created them. Male and female He created them." That's in Genesis 1:27. So from the very beginning, we already have the godly characteristics of God. God has already built in us His characteristics. And our desire at that time was really just to become more and more godly like Him. Unfortunately, we all know the story. Something happened. Sin came into the world. And sin destroyed our godly nature. Sin destroyed the nature that God has given us. We were godly to begin with, but sin destroyed us. But then, because of Jesus, a sinless man who died for us, we can now recover what we've lost by imitating Him. Now there's a difference between being godlike and being godly. The first temptation was the serpent told Eve that if you eat of the fruit, you will become like gods. That's being godlike, and that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about being godly, and being godly means imbibing the characteristics of God. His mercy, His compassion, His love, His patience, everything about God being recovered by us after we've lost it because of sin. And we want to recover that image that we've lost. We want to become more and more like Christ. But then the question is, how do we become like Christ? How do we become like Jesus? Two things. We have to live like Christ, and we have to love like Christ. We have to live like Christ, and we have to love like Christ. First, how do we live like Christ? We have to be intimate with the Father. When Jesus was still in this world and when He was preaching, you could always see in the Gospels His daily communing with His Father. Every day, Jesus would go to a place and pray because He knows that His source of power and His source of strength comes from His intimate relationship with the Father. In the same way, if we want to be like Jesus, we have to have an intimate relationship with God. How? By spending time with the Father every day, being in His presence. In one of the seminars that I conducted, I asked all the couples in that seminar to stand up, and when they all stood up, I told the other participants who were seated, "What do you notice of the couples?" And they realized that most of the couples, they look alike. The couples, the husband and the wife, they look alike. And I said, perhaps it's because they spend so much time together that they almost look like each other. My dear friends, that's what time does. When you spend time with a person, physically you become like him, but also you are able to imbibe his mannerisms, you are able to imbibe the way he thinks, the way he talks, and the way he carries himself. The same thing with God. When we are intimate with God, we become more and more like him. When we are intimate with Christ, when we talk to Jesus and when we read about him in scriptures, we become more and more like him. So how do we live like Jesus? We are intimate with the Father. The second one, we have to be able to live in humility. Jesus lived in humility. When he came into the world as a baby, he did not come in a blazing light. He came in here humbly through a baby born in a manger. And that has been the trademark of his life. Jesus lived in humility. Nowadays, many people, they think that to be great, you have to exercise so much power, and you have to be famous, and you have to be rich, and you have to have this authority that you can wield and make others follow you. But that's not the way of the Lord. And as Christians, as men and women who want to become like Christ, we have to also imitate the way Christ lived his life by living a life of humility. Leadership does not equal power for us. Leadership equals service. Leadership equals love. And for you, my brothers and sisters who are in the leadership team of Lincoln, I'd like to challenge you to really live in humility. Humble yourself every day by serving and every person that the Lord sends your way. It doesn't matter if that person deserves to be served. We will serve because Christ served regardless of whoever that person is. Whether that person is righteous or a sinner, rich or poor, a man or a woman, Christ served everybody. In fact, he died for everyone, the highest form of service. And so that is also what is expected of us by living a life of humility, by living a life of Christian service. And the third way by which we can live like Jesus is by allowing our lives to reflect the words that we speak. Allowing our lives to reflect the words that we speak. In the time of Jesus, when he preached, people always saw his words in the way he lived his life. His life, in a way, reflects what he preaches. And there's a word for that. It's called integrity. And integrity means that your words coincide with the way you live your life. If you talk about loving, you must be loving in the way you live your life. If you talk about respect for others, you must be respecting other people in the way you live your life. In a sense, integrity means a whole life. A life that is not divided. A life that does not say one thing but does another. A life that is whole and integrated means your life reflects your words. And that is integrity. Jesus was a man of integrity. And if you want to be like him, you must also live lives of integrity. So that is how you live like Jesus. And the second way to become like Jesus is to love like Jesus. In John 13:35 it says, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." So if somebody asks you, "How can I know that you're a disciple?" You just tell the person, "Look at the way I love." Because our love tells us that we are disciples. And in the time of Jesus, a disciple is somebody who imitates his master. And if we say that we are disciples of Jesus, then our trademark is love. Because Jesus loved. Jesus loved in three ways. He loved totally, he loved unconditionally, and he loved sacrificially. First, let's talk about total. What does it mean to love in a total way? It means not holding back anything. It means giving your whole self to another. During the Way of the Cross, I would always joke about this, that it's a good thing that Jesus went all the way for all of us. At the scourging of the pillar, Jesus could have said, "Okay, it's only up to here that I'm going to suffer," and then he would call his angels to take him up to heaven. at the point of the scourging at the pillar, or probably at the point when he was being crowned with thorns. He could have just said, up to here only. Wag na, no more. I'm going back to heaven. Or probably when he was being nailed on the cross, he could have just said, just one hand only. Don't nail the other hand. But no, Jesus went all the way. The way of the cross can be titled All the Way of the Cross, because Jesus went all the way. He did not hold back. And if we want to be like him, our love must be total. Our love must be not holding back anything. Our love must be all the way. Second, it must be costly. Must be costly. It involves suffering. In order for us to be like Jesus, we must be willing to suffer like him. Recently, my son Franco was having a toothache, and as I saw him crying in the middle of the night, waiting for the medicine to take effect, I said a very simple prayer. I said, God, ako na lang po sana ang magkasakit. I'm willing to take his pain. I'm willing to suffer for him. And when I said those words, I realized that perhaps those were in some way the same words that Jesus had in his heart. When he saw us in sin, suffering in sin, Jesus said, let me suffer for them, because that's how much he loves us. And therefore, if we want to be like Jesus, we must be willing to suffer like him. In 2008, when I resigned from my job from the government to become a missionary, it was a very difficult year for us financially. Our kids were getting sick, and Jen and I were also not very healthy during that year. But it was that year when I grew the most. In the midst of my suffering, I became more and more like Jesus. And my prayer every year is that I don't lose the fruits of that year when I became like Jesus, such that every year when I suffer, when I experience difficulties and challenges in my life, I will use every challenge and every difficulty to become like Jesus. Costly. It's a costly kind of love. And the last characteristic of loving like Jesus is that it's an unconditional love. It's a love that reaches out to others. It's a love that reaches out especially to those who could not repay. It's an inclusive kind of love, not an exclusive kind of love. It's the love that reaches out to those people, most especially those who could not give back to you anything. Pope Francis said, you cannot take away the poor from the Gospels, because the poor is in the center of the Gospels. And therefore, if we want to be like Jesus, we must reach out even to those people whom we don't want to reach out to. We must reach out to people who are poor in spirit, who are poor materially, who are poor in many ways. And that's the only way for us to become like Christ, to love unconditionally. I heard a story once of a brother. When he was still studying, he was very poor and he didn't have any money. But the brothers and sisters in the community helped his tuition and helped him and did not expect anything from him. And even some of them even invited him to stay in their place and to sleep in their boarding house. And this brother did not have to pay a single cent for years that this brother was with them. And after he graduated, there was even nobody who said, you have to pay us back for what we gave you. No, they loved unconditionally. And today, this brother is one of our leaders in the community because he experienced unconditional love from brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters, if we want to be like Jesus, we have to love totally, in a costly way, and unconditionally. To become like Jesus is to live like Jesus and to love like Jesus. Let me just end with this story. There was this blind vendor who was selling newspapers beside the train. And one day, there was this very busy man who was running late for his appointment, and he entered the train station and started running to catch the train. He accidentally hit the the table where the newspapers were being sold by the blind vendor, and the newspapers fell on the ground. This young man, instead of catching the train, decided to go back and help and fix the table and fix the newspapers. And then the blind vendor said to the man, "Are you Jesus? Are you Jesus?" And the man said, "No, I'm not." And the blind vendor said, "Oh, I thought you were. Because when you helped me, you came back, even though you were getting late and even though you didn't board the train. I realized that even until today, Jesus is still alive." My dear friends, let's be Jesus to others. Let's allow ourselves to live like Him and to love like Him, so that others too may come to know that until today, Jesus, our Master, is still alive. God bless you all.